Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, here in Santa Clara, California. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you're following this out there on the World Wide Web. We're running just momentarily, fragmentarily behind, and we know all where we're heading a little later on at 7:40. So let's not delay. We have a very good speaker, one of my favorites, VP of Cloud Services for Terremark. Let's give it up for Bill Lowry on integrating enterprise clouds. Enjoy, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Check, check, 1, 2. Everybody can hear me? Good news is you can hear me, but I can't quite see all of you, so I'm going to go do this a little bit blind. Hope it's all working out. Show of hands. How many people had heard of Terremark prior to seeing our name on the agenda today? Brilliant. That's much better than I would hope for. How many people here have actually installed a virtual machine at a cloud provider before in their lives? Much smaller subset. How many people have been to a double-digit number of cloud shows in their IT career? Show of hands. Okay, I can raise my hand on that deal as well. Good. So we have somewhat of a slightly technical audience who has heard of Terremark but hasn't attended too many shows. So maybe you haven't seen this pitch 4 or 5 times in a row. So some of it might actually appear to be fresh to you. So I hope it is. I hope it gives you some interesting insights and backgrounds based on what we've discovered. Terremark is a brand name that will remain in the marketplace even after our acquisition by the large company known as Verizon. So you will now see the treatment with the Terremark logo, a Verizon company underneath it. I'm absolutely thrilled about that. I am pre-acquisition. When the acquisition was announced, a lot of us began to wonder what's going to happen, a large telco buying us, all the horror stories you hear about telcos, you know, and what they do in sort of smothering the small companies and all the innovative thinking that came along with them. I'm here to tell you happily that that is quite the contrary, and it is not the case with what we're doing here today. Let me spend just 1 minute on what's going on with Terremark so that you have that correct update. Terremark's legacy is calling on enterprise organizations. Our legacy is not trying to attract the small, medium business customer, although we have a few of those. In general, our best customer is somebody who has a sophisticated IT organization who has internal virtualization projects already underway or completed or have been managed for some time and has a need for a really important application to run in the cloud, not sort of a subsidiary app, not just dev test, not just things that are sort of carelessly tossed to the cloud, but something that is mission critical, right? So if that is our heritage, then understand our legacy is building products around meeting those needs, specifically an enterprise class platform. We build a system that is very high performance. If you move your workload into my area and it performs poorly, it will be difficult for us to do business together. So performance is at a premium for me. It's something that I engineer for. Our global presence was extended with the acquisition. Prior to the acquisition, we had about 13 data centers. We operated on 4 continents. Now we have about 50 data centers that will operate on every continent where we deliver data services. Security is really something that doesn't just come up every once in a while. It's baked into the solution with us, and it is part and parcel of every conversation we have about a cloud deployment with any organization. The security systems and practices we had prior to the acquisition were pretty good. Post-acquisition, though, Verizon has decided to take all of the cyber trust assets, the people, the products, and the processes that they've had in the marketplace in this market-leading MSSP for years, and now move those assets into Terremark. So all those folks are being reverse integrated, right? They're getting new badges, which now have Terremark logos on them, and their products will become part of the Terremark package and offering in the marketplace. To say that our security services have grown exponentially is dramatically understating it. And again, it speaks to the commitment of the company to have a secure cloud solution in the marketplace, so much so that we're going to marry all of our cloud services with our security services so that they're fundamentally tied and it's clear to the customer how important it is to us. And then finally, we try to make it relevant and accessible. We had a very small professional services group prior to the acquisition. Post-acquisition, we're going to bring over about 450 people from their bench into Terremark, and they're going to provide the underlying professional services for IT and security services that we're going to need when we migrate people into our cloud solutions. So pre-acquisition, I was about a $400 million company. Post-acquisition, about a $1.4 billion company. Pre-acquisition, about 1,000 employees. Post-acquisition, about 3,000 employees. So Verizon didn't just come in and strip mine us, throw away the people, and try to keep the goods. They're actually taking the brand, allowing it to compete in the marketplace, but giving it strategic resources so that it can produce a world-class solution. All right, that's enough of the commercial. Now let me get into the content that everybody hopefully came for. And I've neglected to do the build prior to now, so we have an extra moment. I think there's really a fundamental difference between the type of services that we provide and that we see as most popular with our customers and the services provided by a lot of my competitors. I think a lot of my competitors are interested in selling people a cloud-shaped box. The cloud-shaped box is black, it's small, it has a regular size and shape. The unit of consumption is very easy to deal with, but you don't get to know very much about what's inside the box, right? It's black. And the vendor of the cloud-shaped box doesn't always tell you what's going on the inside. Sometimes you have to divine for yourself what's going on. And unless you have a pretty high level of sophistication, it's difficult for you to get information about how the box operates, what the underlying technology might be, and what the performance characteristics of that box might be. Now, if you're satisfied with just knowing that the box exists and that you can send workloads to it, and most of the time it works great, then so be it. Most of the customers we engage, though, want a more open solution. They want to know intricate detail about the type of processor we run on, what machine it goes into, where the data center is located, what's the transit profile look like in and out of that data center, how do I monitor that data center, what security teams do I use in order to get things done, blah, 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 blah. What I find is that most people are interested in a higher level of transparency. All right, cloud, while interesting, while a new way to acquire infrastructure, while a way to shift the economic model, right, from a perhaps more expensive capital-intensive way of doing things to a perhaps less expensive, more OpEx-focused way of doing things, is still IT. And the IT organizations we call on are desperately interested in what we've built that IT solution out of. And I think that that's going to create a large separation between the types of vendors that you'll run across in the marketplace. I'm not saying one is particularly bad or good, but I think this is a point of contention that you have to be aware of when you're out there evaluating the different cloud providers. So I think as we go through the conversation, I like to provide metaphors to help you understand what I believe is going on in the marketplace. The metaphor of choice I use for explaining this is a real estate metaphor, right? So on one end of the spectrum, we have public cloud providers. Public cloud providers are a bit like moving into a motel. Right? We talked about earlier, the unit of consumption is very easily understood. You get a room in a hotel, right? And the room should have a remote control, should have a bed, it should have a working toilet, maybe a nice view depending on what you spend on it, but everybody understands what they're getting into when they walk into the hotel game, right? However, it's a completely shared context. You have to use the same hallways that everybody else uses. You get to use the same elevators. You go to the same front desk to resolve all your problems. You don't get a lot of choice or selection in those matters, but you cede that choice in order to get the convenience of the form factor in terms of what you buy. It's kind of like being in a public cloud environment. You might create a VM, and you might take that VM and install it in a commodity cloud broker's area, and poof, you're now in the cloud. But don't forget that VM is running on some physical server somewhere in that cloud architecture. And that physical server is certainly going to run more than one VM. In fact, they're probably going to load up multiple VMs on there in order to get the scale necessary for them to get the economics of their business to work out right. And without question, the people who consume resources on that physical server will do them at different rates. And some will dramatically increase their usage over time and some won't. You may wind up with noisy neighbors. Like the noisy neighbor experience is a real problem in a commodity cloud world and something you have to deal with. And it's completely appropriate to a motel environment, right? I was in Atlantic City last week. I got there about 10:30 at night. I checked in and I was really looking forward to get some sleep before my speaking engagement the next morning. And lo and behold, at about 10:45, the guest next door to me arrived with about 10 of their friends. And they were very loud and very excited to be in Atlantic City and apparently had been living it up. And my experience was affected. Now, they didn't intrude my physical space, they didn't steal anything of mine, they didn't do anything physically to harm me, but my experience was affected. And I had to deal with it. I had to call security, I had to ask the front desk to call them and get them to tone down. I know that the front desk called them because I could hear the telephone through the thin walls between me and the other people. So the process worked, right? All the things that I bought into I had to deal with, but it leaves you lacking. The other thing about it is that rarely do people move into a motel and live there permanently. I mean, I guess you could. It could be a nice environment. But for most people, it doesn't give you enough definitional context about what you want your experience to be in there permanently. I don't mean to be derisive, by the way, of public cloud. We have a public cloud product that we sell in the marketplace. It does quite well. Obviously, many public cloud providers in the marketplace are huge companies who have expansive resources and lots of customers. So the product must be pretty good, and a lot of people must use it. But I would argue that it's not necessarily appropriate for every single use case. So if public cloud is on one end of the spectrum, I would say that the other end of the spectrum is represented by private cloud. And of course, is represented here. Private cloud, is very nice, right? It's everything you ever wanted, and you get to architect it from the ground up. So you get to choose how it looks and how many bedrooms are there and where the bathrooms are located and where's the property situated and how do you build the fence around it and who's your architect, who gets to define all the variables about the property. It's great. Whenever you've built something from scratch and it's yours and yours alone, you take immense pride in it. And it usually turns out to be something that you really wanted all along. In fact, most people consider it to be fully secure. Right? Because of all the customization and because you're the only tenant, then by virtue it must be secure. You only let in the people that you want to let in, you keep out all the rest. The real problem with this, though, is that I think if you're not the very largest of organizations with a highly diverse workload that works across multiple time zones and multiple locations, I don't think you're going to get the economies of scale you were hoping for in the cloud environments, right? Now, just be clear, if you decide to build the private cloud, that's fine. I am not averse to building private clouds for our customers. A little under 10% of what we build for customers are private clouds. They are server farms that we've built for their use and their use only, or we've built single-tenant infrastructures that only they can access. And we're fine with building and operating and managing those for people, but they are expensive to deploy, they're expensive to maintain, and they're expensive to operate. And if you do it internally, be prepared, because it's not just the CapEx that has to go along with that, it's where you physically located. And is your staff competent to deal with virtualization, let alone orchestration, let alone multiple organizations in your environment all trying to use that same resource at the same time, and then managing the capacity to deal with all that. Not to say it can't be done, and certainly not to be derisive of it, but there's a lot of things to consider when moving into that market. I think neatly splitting the two is a concept called the virtual private cloud, and this is by far the most popular product that I see enterprises adopt today. It's a bit like moving into the high-rise here. It's real fancy and it's real nice, but no question, it's multi-tenant. You live there with other people, but the separation is better. Right? It's probably cinder block between you and your neighbor, not studs and drywall. And you provision your own utilities, right? You bring in your own power, you pay your own power bill, you have your own fuse box. If your neighbor installs a microwave and he blows out his fuse, your experience shouldn't be affected, right? You should have a completely isolated experience in that instance. A virtual private cloud, properly architected, gives you that same logical segmentation of resources so that your resource pool is separate and distinct from every other resource pool on the same physical cluster. And that separation needs to extend through the firewall, through the different address spaces that you have, maybe through a load balancer. You shouldn't be able to nmap all the other people on the physical cluster, and similarly, they shouldn't be able to nmap you and figure out what your root address scheme is, right? All those things have to be there. The nice part about this is if you build the logical segmentation properly, you now can do some things. You can now guarantee certain things like availability. You might even be able to find a provider that would guarantee a level of performance that they wouldn't do otherwise. And then certainly you can find people that can now provide SLAs with teeth around the resources that they've promised to give to you. The other thing that comes along with this is auditability. So if you have an application that requires some sort of audit like HIPAA or PCI DSS certification for credit card processing or FSMA or DICAP in the federal world, you now have a cloud architecture that can actually be audited and then presented as a report to the people who actually need the information. Big difference between it and commodity cloud infrastructure. So I hope these metaphors work for you. They work for me, and I think they logically explain things in a pretty clear fashion. The other thing we find is that as people go through and make their choices about cloud, they have very fundamentally different approaches, right? Enterprises differ heavily from tech startups. Most enterprises have a lot of things going for them. They also have a lot of legacy applications. And these legacy applications might have thousands of users inside of them who might have petabytes of information stored that goes back multiple years, maybe even decades. And that stuff ain't going away anytime soon. So how you integrate that with your cloud solution is critical. Sometimes enterprises have non-virtualizable hardware. Can anybody here raise their hand and not be ashamed to say that they still have an AS400 running in their environment doing something productive? That AS400 has been around for a long time, right? And that code, by the way, all the bugs were fixed a long time ago. And it just runs. It just works. There's no reason to throw it away. And there's no budget to do it because the budget goes to all the sexy new apps, not the old sort of interesting apps, or uninteresting apps, excuse me, that kind of keep your enterprise going. But those things exist. And a lot of times data and information is pulled from those and shared with whatever you're presenting in the cloud. Do you have a strategy for dealing with that? The biggest problem, though, that enterprises have is that they got stuff. They have processes. They have people. They have vendor relationships that they established a long time ago, and they're not going to get out of anytime soon. They have contracts that they've gone into with certain people to provide services. They just bought stuff. They might have even just built stuff, right? And you can't just throw it all away. The amortization schedules don't work that way. So you've got to figure out a way to deal with how you build in everything else they had. Tech startups, on the other hand, are architected quite differently. They have Ferraris and interesting choices in footwear, but most importantly, they have a clean slate. And aside from whatever personal preferences they're walking in with, they really don't have any problems building something new in the cloud versus what they've done in the past. In fact, if you've got no resources to start with, the cloud is an excellent target for being able to deploy whatever application you want to rewrite and start from scratch. You just don't have that luxury, though, when you're talking to most enterprise IT organizations. So what are some of the problem areas that enterprises find themselves in that they need to get through? Let's spend a couple of slides talking about that. Like I said earlier, they're going to have applications, so how you integrate with those is important. They probably also have management systems. They probably also have systems for measuring performance and understanding workloads and figuring out whether or not certain departments are happy or not. How does all that stuff migrate to the cloud? Do you have a strategy? Is your cloud compatible even with those technologies? That's an important thing to figure out. Almost everybody we talk to has got some sort of internal virtualization project going on right now. If you're not doing it, just for the CapEx savings of better utilization of your physical assets, you're doing it because everybody's doing it, right? So internal virtualization projects are important. Understanding how they architected that and then how they can migrate and move that to the cloud and how compatible the two things can be, pretty important thing, I think, to go through. And a lot of people don't want to take over, right? They would rather have somebody else manage the whole thing for them. They don't feel like it's an as a service unless it's presented as a service, right? And all the service is included, and all they have to do is hit the button and pay for it every month and then see the results, right? So managed services inside the cloud are growing, and I think going to be even more important over the next few weeks and months, weeks and years than they have been in the last year or two. I think policy and process is critical. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of customers who have to meet all kinds of audits. And these audits are extensive. And if you can't provide reasonable information about the underlying technology that your cloud solution is delivered on, you can't pass the audit. If you don't even know where the physical data center is, where your data resides, then your guys can't walk in with a clipboard and figure it out. That's an immediate no, right? There's no way you're going to pass the audit in that situation. So you got to have ways to deal with that kind of stuff. I would say that security comes up all the time, right? But security isn't for us a bunch of bolt-on products like IDSs and IPSs and network security. You got to think about the cloud security, right? Everyone here has heard ad nauseum about hypervisor to hypervisor-based attacks. How do you actually monitor and measure those? Do you have a SOC that's actually sophisticated in dealing with that kind of attack? Our company has taken the extreme approach of going out and buying companies who we think have the best tools that allow us to visualize hypervisor to hypervisor-based attacks. We then monitor those situations. In fact, we have one tool that allows us to take a picture of a memory map inside of a VM and store it. And then 5 minutes later, we take another one and we store it and we do comparative diagnostics. And if we see any big variance without some sort of reciprocating application change, we now know there's a problem, right? And that alerts our team to do something. They can either continue to collect information, they can alert the customer immediately and have the process stopped. But the cool thing about it is what we're examining cannot be seen by the attacker. Right? So it's not like a network appliance where we're having to intrude and do something to add latency. We're doing this in real time without giving away any information to the attacker of what we're doing. This is pretty powerful stuff. And it's not to say that we're the only people doing this, but likely it's a really important part of whatever the cloud solution has to be for an enterprise IT organization. Make sure you understand the physical security aspects of how they get things done. One thing I forgot to mention is access management. It's not just your administrators remotely accessing the cloud and administering the servers. It's who actually accesses the applications in the cloud and who has the authority to do that, right? I now work ostensibly for Verizon, one of the world's largest providers of cell phone technology. So they are working feverishly to figure out how we can use the cell phones we all carry in our pockets to provide universal identity and authentication services, right? Because you hardly go anywhere without your cell phone. And it could be as simple as when you type in your name and password, something like Phone Factor calls your phone and you have to enter a code. And if that code is entered properly, now you have that two-factor authentication that allows you to get access to the application. It could be even more robust. It could be near-field communication chips that are built into the phone and the phone being location aware would know that you're at a specific location where access is normally granted, and that as long as you have coded in properly with your phone, why couldn't you be the correct user and then be able to take advantage of what's going on in the cloud? There's even deeper trials around multi-factor authentication with physical devices I won't go into today, but realize I think that's a really critical component of how you use remote resources, things that aren't in your control or in your physical control anymore. And I think that technology is going to become much more powerful and much more interesting over the next few months. You got to make sure that you can get to the cloud, right? Because one of the core attributes is that it's remote, right? It's somewhere else. So what does the network look like between you and that place? By the way, are the services provided in a facility that has carrier neutrality? Right? Prior to the acquisition, Terremark was all about carrier-neutral facilities. After the acquisition, Terremark is still all about carrier-neutral facilities. So don't think that just because we're owned by Verizon that now all of a sudden you're going to have one choice and one choice only for bandwidth in and out. It's rare to find a provider that gives you a single choice, but you got to be sure that the choices that they offer you are things that are relevant to your company. And it's more than one or two, right? It doesn't have to be a NAP, right, with 170 different carriers inside of it, but it probably has to be better than one or two providers in a small space. Don't forget about global reach, right? A lot of people get into the cloud because they don't want to build the data centers in all the remote locations. They want to build a network that connects their resources between other things, but you usually use the cloud provider to extend your reach, right? So that's something to look at as well. I think the way you orchestrate and manage the information is really important. And I think what's going to happen over time is this concept of cloud brokerage is going to become a table stakes sort of feature for every cloud vendor that's in the marketplace. How do I actually migrate and move workload in and out? Today, for most people, it's highly manual, or you can choose from one of about 15 different custom applications that allow you to migrate VMs in and VMs out. And usually they make you save it to a central format like an OVF file or a VMDK file. Sometimes they force you to have hypervisor compatibility between the two platforms. That's probably not as appealing. And the real problem is there's no concrete standards around how all this stuff works, right? Everybody's defining their own tools and defining their own methods of portability over time. That's all going to get fixed in the next 3 to 5 years. There's no way the cloud marketplace advances unless we get all that stuff fixed. So cloud brokerage is going to become one of the more important aspects in there. And the tools you use around orchestration are going to be critical choices that you make. Because what I believe is that we're all going to live in a hybrid world, right? At the core, every enterprise is going to have some sort of private cloud. It might be VMware running on 50 servers, and you might call that cloud, and that might be great for you. Maybe there should be some more to it, but fine, that's a private cloud, and you got there, so we're proud of you. That was good. But no question you're looking at external providers. You're either looking at external providers for things like dev and test, which you consider to be sort of an annoyance, really, inside of your IT organization, something that you need to provide more resources for, but you hate to buy more servers for. And so cloud kind of fits, right? It's really a nice model for how to provide that extended service portfolio to a function that's not really as core as you would like to think it is in the IT provider's mind. Similarly, you've got virtual private cloud technology, which I think you'll use for production applications. Might not be your core, right? I think there'll always be a place for your application to run in your four walls, but I think over time, I can guarantee what people do over time is that they take a little bit of application and move it into the cloud. And it goes so well, they go, let's move another one over there. And that one goes so well, they say, let's move another one over there. And I can tell you a dirty little secret from a cloud provider's perspective, you people never leave, right? I always thought that we would have this enormous amount of churn in the cloud marketplace and that I'd be losing 25 to 30% of my customer base every quarter. It's not the case. My churn is way less than that, less than 2%. For the last 5 quarters that I've been able to measure information for. So what's happening? You're taking workloads, you're moving them into the cloud, and you're leaving them there ad nauseum, right? Great for me, but it's a totally different model than what I expected to see. I also expect that as compliance and regulatory bodies become more pervasive, you're going to have more community clouds built. You're going to have cloud infrastructure built around a certain type of application requirement that's common to a wide variety of people. HIPAA would be an easy example for this, right? Credit card processing with PCI DSS, as I mentioned earlier. I'm not talking about SSAE 16 and the profiles that are necessary to deal with that. That's kind of table stakes for physical data center management stuff. I'm talking about as we evolve applications, people are going to say, if it's going to be in the cloud, I got to know it's safe, and I got to know it's secure, and I got to know it's accessed by the right people. Therefore, we are going to audit it, and you're going to have to produce a report that it meets that audit. fine. I think there are going to be specific cloud solutions that get built around those audit controls so that people who need to move into the cloud but still need to answer to those controls have a warm, safe, well-lit place where they can put their data and do that. I think it's critical. And then, of course, the DR component of this makes it really compelling. I can't tell you the number of customers who come to us now, and instead of going to a physical location, a second site that they build or buy, they come to us, they build 150 VMs, they test them, make sure they all work, and they power them all down, and they wait. Right? That level of DR, which, by the way, you don't pay for processing time in my cloud while you're not using it, is enormously less expensive than the physical asset transfer model. Yes, you still have to do data replication at some tier. Yes, you still have to make sure the machines come up and they're patched properly, but they're VMs. It's not that hard. It's very simple to actually replace the entire data disaster recovery infrastructure if you wanted to. In fact, set up 2. It's really cheap. Put one on the West Coast, put one on the East Coast. Rev the one on the East Coast, make sure it tests and works right, and then rev the one on the West Coast. And you never have any event of downtime because you were out of sync in terms of what your data or application profiles were like. I think this is going to become very realistic over time. I've even seen people who have told me they were never, 10 years ago, told me they would never build an application that didn't have redundant hardware and no single point of failure and physical infrastructure all the way through, come back and say, nah, I just need one app server, I need one web server and one database server. Why are you doing that? Well, I can spin up another one in 5 minutes. So what's 5 minutes mean to me? No, I don't get that fourth 9, but they give me that third 9. And that third 9 is actually pretty important to my business, and for this particular application, it's fine. So instead of duplicating the expense of physical hardware, right, and having to buy 2 of everything, they just buy 1 of everything. And they rely on spinning it up in the cloud in less than 5 minutes as their backup plan. I'm not advocating that, by the way, for everybody in the room here. And I know I've just sent a shockwave through most of the traditional IT organizational people that are in the room, me included. But I'm telling you, real people are making these decisions. The other thing that this chart implies is that there'll be mobility, right? But my thought is that the mobility will be predicated on a compelling event, a failure that requires a failover, or some sort of planned outage. By the way, IT people don't like change, right? Can we all agree on that? Change is bad in an IT organization. Change is when your weaknesses get exposed. Change is when you figured out the change you made 3 times ago didn't work right? So change is usually managed rigorously by most IT organizations, and it's not done willy-nilly. Consequently, I don't think you're going to take your workloads and then rocket them across the globe, arbitraging their cost per workload on a pennies per minute difference. Right? You're not going to do that because once your IT works, you want it to stay stable. So you want it to stay where it is and continue to work and operate. You don't change it all the time. So I think cloud operators who actually help those customers rigorously manage the change will be the more successful cloud operators in the future. In fact, I think this is so important, I think we literally went out and bought a company over the whole thing. Right? So one of the I think most compelling technologies, when I started with Terremark, I went and saw the Cloud Switch demonstration. I came right back and I said, we got to figure out a way to do business with these guys. And I'm not going to claim responsibility for purchasing the company, but I was a huge advocate of the technology for such a long time that I was thrilled to hear that we were going to commit the capital to go out and buy CloudSwitch. So CloudSwitch is now part of the Terremark family of solutions. For those who aren't familiar, I think CloudSwitch is the thing that makes hybrid work. How do you actually get your users to use things in your enterprise data center, your utility cloud service, maybe your colo, maybe your MSP or cloud service that's maybe a more multi-tenant type solution? What's that underlying glue that gets everything to work together? I think CloudSwitch is a technology that allows you to take applications that you have deployed in your premise and then migrate them over to different cloud providers. And it doesn't have to be old stuff, right? You could put all new applications in the cloud, but you could use this technology from CloudSwitch to actually do the migrations for you. Now, I'm oversimplifying it dramatically. It's more than just moving workloads around, because lots of people can move workloads around. What really makes them interesting is that they can take and analyze your internal data center, which is depicted on the left. And you can profile different applications. If you're in the VM world, you'd call them VApps, right? But it's the idea of the whole stack, or the web application and database tier, or the multiple tiers inside of any application delivery method that you can group together, right? And then what you do is install an appliance, a VM, not a 19-inch track mountable appliance, but a virtual machine inside of whatever virtualization you're running internally, and then whatever virtualization choice you make with a cloud provider. Those two things then talk to each other, and they create this VPN, if you will, this dedicated tunnel between you and your resource pool. And then when you want to move an application, bummer, I didn't have the build slide in here. I apologize. I was about to do something spectacular that was going to leave you speechless, but I'll have to talk you through it. The applications that you see depicted over there can then be migrated across that VPN, if you will, into the different cloud providers. It doesn't just support Terremark, by the way. It supports Amazon Web Services and a couple of others. And in fact, we're going to expand the service portfolio to every major cloud provider that's in the marketplace, because we think this is a compelling enough tool that you could never actually buy my cloud, but you probably want to use this to migrate between clouds. So we're not going to do anything to prevent that from happening. The really cool thing is that while you're doing the migration, everything is encrypted. The data is encrypted. If you move this encrypted VM into the cloud and then boot it up and do some things, that's great. It runs and operates fine. But if some nefarious person was supposed to walk in the data center and yank your hard drive and run away with your data and then try to figure out what it is, it's all encrypted. It would take them a really long time. And the keys are not owned by the service provider. The keys are safe at home with the customer. So key management resides with the proper authority, the person who owns the data, not the provider of the cloud services. It's a really interesting technology. I could go on and on and on and on about it, but I just wanted to give you a level of exposure about it. Two quick notes. There's a lot of people moving to the cloud. I'd be happy to stay afterwards and answer a bunch of questions about some of our customers. Some of them include software as a service providers, specifically this one in the healthcare industry. They run practice management solutions that require HIPAA-compliant solutions. They came to us and said they wanted to plan a nice 6 to 9 month migration strategy into our cloud. They called us 3 weeks later and said, we've had a big miss. We've got to get to the cloud now. We're not going to be able to buy enough physical assets internally to support the application. And they said, we got to go. And we said, how quickly do you want to do it? And they go, how about Sunday? And we said, oh my goodness. So the good news was, we're a cloud provider, right? So we had excess capacity, and we were able to actually execute a move of 300 VMs from their legacy system into our cloud in 1 weekend. Not saying that your results will match that, but it can be done with the right circumstances. We're also being examined by very large financial services firms. If I revealed to you the names, you would know them instantly. And there are people that you would probably be very surprised are looking at cloud technology. This particular financial institution has developers spread out all over the globe. And they want to do They want to use the cloud for development efforts, but they can't just use any old cloud. They've spent 13 months vetting the security of our cloud, so much so that they've decided to take their firewall, their IDS, their IPS, build a SOC on a rack, if you will, and co-locate it with our cloud physically in the same environment. We then attach that infrastructure to their MPLS backbone, and that's how they get into their cloud instance in a highly secure way that's just like every other branch that they operate all over the world. They also use Hudson for continuous integration, if you know what that tool does, and they use CloudSwitch to do the migration between the different areas. What CloudSwitch allows them to do in this scenario is to make sure that all the VMs are identical in every single deployment, so that when you do development work in London, it's exactly the same platform as you were using in the States and exactly the same platform you're using in Asia Pac. So very important to them to have continuity of data between all the different things. I'm out of time. I apologize for going over. If you want to take questions, too late to do that?
Too late to do that, but never too late to say thank you to Bill Lowry for a jam-packed presentation. I'm sure that was like 42 minutes crammed into 30.